Hello, 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 family. Welcome to another episode of Epic Understanding. You know, I can honestly say I am forever surprised at where Epic Understanding takes us. But the reality is, what we are about is exploring every single sector of our heart and of the world. And so today, um, it brings us to the point where we are exploring the war in Ukraine. I'm just going to be honest and say I never thought that I'd really be discussing such a subject matter as this, but I am. I am fortunate enough to have some exciting guests here with us today. One of the first people that I'm going to bring you is a gentleman that goes by the name of Old Blue. And he goes by that name in order to keep himself protected. He has a very extensive military background. And so I'm going to bring him up right now. Welcome, Old Blue. How are you? Old Blue? Hello?
Me now?
I can hear you now. How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm good. Unfortunately, I think we may wind up with some echo problems. I cannot get my external microphone to work, so.
I got it. Got it. I am introducing you to our audience. So as you kind of get yourself settled there, what I'd like for you to do, please, if you would be kind enough to, would you please tell us a little bit about your background?
Okay, sure. I spent 33 and a half years serving in the Army. Um, I was trained as an infantryman, and I spent 3 tours in Afghanistan. 2 of those tours were as a combat advisor working with the Afghans directly, out and about in many villages. And uh, my second tour, I taught counterinsurgency at the Counterinsurgency Training Center, Afghanistan. So, and also got to travel extensively in Afghanistan during that time. I'm a lifelong student of political science. Went to the University of Maryland, and so uh, that's my background in a nutshell. I'm obviously fairly old, and I have 4 children. So,
Okay, okay. And why do you believe that you are an expert in speaking of things related to this war in Ukraine?
well, I don't claim to be an expert in anything. Um,
Or why should we be listening to you? Perhaps I should say it that way. Why should we listen to your thoughts as it relates to the war in Ukraine?
well, because I've first of all, I was trained initially when I was a young soldier, and for about the first 10 years of my career, I was trained to fight against the Soviet Union.
Mm-hmm.
So all of that equipment that you see on television, I know what it's called. I know the names of most of those pieces of equipment because I was trained to identify them. So I understand how the Soviets and slash Russians. I understand how their doctrine is supposed to operate.
Mm-hmm.
So I have a fairly decent understanding of what it should look like according to their doctrine.
Mm-hmm.
And I've also, so I was trained in maneuver warfare, but I had to self-train myself on counterinsurgency because I was trained for the big conventional war, which is more or less what you're seeing in Ukraine, combined arms maneuver warfare. Then I had to train myself in counterinsurgency because when I was going downrange to Afghanistan for the very first time, I knew that I was going into a war that I was not trained to fight. I was not trained to fight against an insurgency. I was trained to fight against a peer or near peer regional or world power. like the Soviet Union or Russia is now.
Okay. So you were trained specifically by the U.S. military to fight against the Soviets in this type of war that is
Mhm.
currently being fought right now.
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
excellent. And so I appreciate your knowledge in this matter.
Okay.
So earlier this week we chatted, and you said that there were ways to fight a war. Can you please break down the different types of what ways that um, America fights wars?
I think what I'm hearing in your question is that you're asking about the elements of national power.
Yes, the elements of national power.
Okay. The elements of national power we describe as we use the acronym DIME, DIME,
Yes.
and they stand for diplomatic, information, military, and economic.
Okay. And can you please explain those in detail?
Well, diplomatic, for instance, you've seen lots of examples of the diplomatic in the last 2 months.
Mm-hmm.
Nations speaking to each other. Um, even phone calls between the president of the United States and the Russian president.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you've seen meetings between the Ukrainian government and the Russian government, even within the last 2 weeks.
Okay.
So those are diplomatic,
Okay.
but also there's the pressure that nations can exert on other nations through agencies like the United Nations.
Okay.
So, the United States and other countries have gone before the United Nations, and they've had votes. 100 and I think there were only 5 countries out of the entire bunch that did not vote to condemn the Russians for the invasion. Of course, since Russia has a seat, a permanent seat on the UN Security Council, they can veto many of the actions of of the uh, of the United Nations. So, but diplomatic is one of the key differences between this conflict that we see unfolding in front of us and other conflicts that we've seen in the last 20 years, like Iraq and Afghanistan and Kosovo and places like that, where the UN was basically consulted beforehand, complaints were made before the UN, votes were taken, resolutions were made. The Russians have not pursued that in the United Nations. As a matter of fact, they were telling the world right up until the last minute that they were not going to invade. So that's diplomatic. Informational, we see that every day, both through our own news media. We see the Russian media. We hear about the crackdown on information in Russia. That's information warfare. Uh, the stories that they tell of why they've invaded Ukraine. So they've got their narrative. Everybody has a narrative, and the effectiveness of that narrative, and how consistent it is, and so forth, and how truthful it is, or apparently truthful. So
Mhm.
what's plausible, what's believable, those things. So the information is the stories that you tell, basically, about what you're doing. Military is obvious.
Mhm.
Um, and while military is the primary means that you see Russia and Ukraine interfacing with each other at the moment, we are not interfacing primarily militarily, because if we did, that could escalate into World War III. The economic is, in this case, in our response, in the Western response, is the primary response in this case. And we see that manifested in the sanctions. But economic power can be manifested in a lot of ways and utilized in a lot of ways. And we see both positive and negative. For instance, we felt that investing economically in China would cause them to liberalize and become more democratic.
Mhm.
And it for a while actually appeared to move things in that direction. But what we've seen is, it depends on the leadership, because under the current leadership, they have not liberalized. They've actually, ever since Xi took power, they have actually regressed as far as control and so forth. So we did see some progress made after Tiananmen Square, and now we've seen essentially a backlash or reaction back in the other direction towards becoming, now they've got social credit scores and things like that. So we thought we would get a certain outcome out of our utilization of our economic element of national power, and sometimes it doesn't work out the way that you want it to. So, but in this case, we see banking sanctions. We see credit cards, processing companies shutting down their operations in Russia. We see economic sanctions put against specific individuals, as well as embargoes, if you will, of we're not going to buy your gas, for instance. West Germany, or not West Germany, it's Germany. Germany has become a bit dependent on Russian gas supplies. Now they're looking for alternatives, because another element of that economic power is, if Germany displeases Russia, Russia could literally hobble them by turning off the gas flow. And they've actually done that to a couple of countries in the last 10 years. So would you say that's an adequate description?
Yes, I really find this fascinating. Mr. Pelu has joined us, and I want to really bring him into this conversation, although I think he might be frozen, unfortunately. But since we've gone down this path, I do want to really thank him for introducing me to you. He is actually the producer of this particular episode, and officially my co-host for this evening. I think there has been some technical difficulties. So if you haven't noticed, he's kind of been popping in and out. And I'm going to ask him to scoot into the light, because I can hardly see him. But hopefully those things will get worked out. But just to tell you a little bit about the work that Mr. Pelu has been doing, he has gathered the guests for me today. I believe we're expecting someone else who has a strong historical reference, or a historical expertise as it relates to the history of Ukraine and Russia. And so I'm very excited about the work he's done. And I also want to share just a clip here of some work that Mr. Pelu did interviewing some people for us. So here is his first interview at the Ukraine Embassy in Washington, D.C.
Hello everybody. Yes, I'm in front of the Ukrainian Embassy, and I'm with one of the well wishers of Ukraine right here. Ma'am, give us your thoughts and opinions about what you think is going on in Ukraine and what should be done and everything you want to talk about.
Well, I think it's butchery by Putin, but that's what he does all the time.
It's butchery by Putin. That's what he does all the time.
Yeah.
Is it similar to do you see parallels in other things you've seen in history?
Absolutely, and only in the last 10 years, and he's the one to blame.
Okay, he's the one to blame. He's the one to blame, because I know there's Ukraine, there's Georgia, there's everything. So hey everybody, that's one opinion from the streets of Washington D.C. in front of the embassy of Ukraine. Pelu time is important for Brain Society.
So I stole him from Brilliant Society, everyone. But thank you, Mr. Pelu, for sharing that raw footage with us. Unmute yourself and tell us your thoughts.
Yes. Thanks for having me. I love to be. I'm loving this. It's something that we need to cover. It's an important thing. We call the program Blood Brothers War for Ukraine. Because we recognize the interconnection of these people, just like we recognize the interconnection of all of us, and we're looking into the history, the causes, and possibilities in this conflict. Because in this ongoing conflict, the world has to be on high alert, especially us in America being the superpower of the world, and this and the third. What is the global order? What is to come? What should we expect? What caused the situation we're in today? All these things should be considered, and that's why we're doing the show, Blood Brothers. We have Old Blue with me, and also Abhijit, Ayer, Ayer Mitra, Ayer Mitra. Sorry for not perfecting your name already, but Abhijit, I appreciate you being here. Back to Coach Love.
So, yes, welcome, Abujat. How are you?
Good morning. I'm sorry, it's morning out here. It's just really early, so I'm slightly disoriented. I thought, there was a time difference. I thought we were doing this an hour later, and then it turns out there was a hour change yesterday or something like that, so it's 1 hour earlier.
Yes,
But
yes. Oh my goodness, the gift of daylight savings time.
yes,
Yes.
yes, the curse of daylight savings, as far as I'm concerned, because we
Well,
don't
yes, you
have
know
that
what?
here. Yay!
Yes, you know what?
So,
Well, we can just take it with stride, enjoy. But I must say, I am humbled by your presence and thankful for your presence. I've had the opportunity to watch a bit of your work, and your depth of knowledge is mind blowing.
right.
Just one video. It was just to be honest. It was a 2-hour video that I recently watched of yours. I've had to watch it for 6 hours and I still didn't get it all. I was taking furious notes because it's so much um, information in there. If you could you just tell us a little bit about your background, and then tell us what is meant by being Russian and what is meant by being Ukrainian. Just
Mm, okay. First, thanks for having me on, guys. Great finally meeting you, Coach Love, and hey, Mr. Pelu. And hey, Old Blue as well, even though I can't see you. Um, so I work in a think tank in Delhi, and I've pretty much always worked in think tanks or in academia. Uh, but I lived in Russia as a kid, well, the USSR, not Russia in those days, and used to travel a lot. So a lot of my uh, exposure to Russia comes from that time. Admittedly, it's a very Soviet exposure. It's not a Russia exposure. Uh, but when we say Russian and Ukrainian, Russian for a long time used to be almost a religious identifier of the Russian Orthodox Church, the third Rome, because there was Rome, the second Rome was Constantinople, Istanbul today, and the third Rome was meant to be Moscow because of, the Byzantine emperor sending his daughter to get married to uh, the Prince of Kiev and Rus. Kiev was the original Russia. Uh, the issue then is, like, centers of civilization tend to shift. uh, in India, for example, the center of civilization, well, I, I realize this is a very loaded term when you say civilized and uncivilized,
mhm,
but let's say the cultural center
mhm,
would have been the north, and during the Muslim invasions, it shifted south. The same way, for example, during the Mongol invasions of China, the cultural center became the southern Song dynasty rather than being the north, as was usually the norm. In America, for example, you could say this is how the East Coast dominated before the mad rush to the West, and the West became more powerful in that sense. So, what you see with Russia is the Mongol invasions change a lot of what happens. The Russian identity splits into three, which comes about because of large distances. So you have Russia to the north, uh, with under the Principality of Novgorod, and specifically Vladimir Suzdal, which Novgorod sends its prince to rule this tiny little irrelevant backwater called Moscow, uh,
Mhm.
which later absorbs Vladimir Suzdal and then absorbs Novgorod and becomes the new Kiev in that sense.
Mhm.
And therein starts our story. Because Kiev and the surroundings were the most agriculturally rich regions, they were also
Mhm.
just completely depopulated by the Mongols to a large extent. Uh, Not just depopulated in a sense, but decultured. Because remember, when you have a almost genocidal campaign against somebody, you can wipe out somebody's culture almost entirely.
Mhm.
In the same way, for example, the German campaigns in Namibia wiped out the Herero, or Julius Caesar's campaign against the Helvetii kind of, or and Gaul, which killed off a quarter of Gaul's population, changed Gaul. It changed it from a fundamentally Celtic civilization to a completely Romance civilization, or Trajan's annexation of Dacia, modern day Romania, which means that it's the only Romance language spoken on the Black Sea, and they're the only Orthodox liturgy that uses a Romance language. So there are lots of examples of this kind of extremely violent campaigns happening. And then you see the modern definition of Russia and Ukraine kind of crystallized during the phase of the Russian Empire, which starts around 1650 onwards. What happens is Russian becomes, it starts off still being religious, but it becomes more and more a linguistic cultural marker. To be Russian is to be someone of the city, urbane, educated, sophisticated, take great pride in a culture. In that sense, what is it to be an American? Is it to have an American dream, or is it an ethno linguistic identification? You could say that being an American started off being a WASP, white Anglo Saxon Protestant. And today, a WASP is not a definition of an American. An American is an extremely broad ethno religious range, which more or less involves looking forward to the American dream, a great future, a spirit of enterprise. It's an idea. Here, it's a language and an idea. The problem is there's also a very similar definition, but opposite definition that develops of Ukraine, which is that essentially of a country bumpkin. In modern lingo, it's what you'd call a redneck in America. uh, Crude, unsophisticated, inward looking, uh, essentially a farm working peasant. And
And
that
who is
is
it- and who is that defining? Is that defining a Ukraine person?
that's what Russian literature defines Ukraine as. So
I
if you read Gogol, Gogol, of course, was a Ukrainian. Bulgakov, again, born in Ukraine. They see Ukraine as this wild, wild west, the untamed uh, lands of Cossacks, whereas it is the cities which are the preserve of culture. And like all city versus rural divides, rural areas will fundamentally tend to be more conservative, more endogamous, whereas cities would always be melting pots of culture. You can't be ethnically homogenous in a city. There's a natural process in cities, which means you intermarry, you mingle, you mix. It
Mhm.
produces a lot of creativity, culture, and things like that. That slowly starts getting to be the norm. The
I
problem
see.
then is when these identities start solidifying, because there's the period of Polish rule as well, where you have a huge part of the Catholic West incorporated into Ukraine ultimately by the 1800s, and even more so after Stalin shifts, after the Second World War, shifts Poland into Eastern Germany
Hey,
and
Abhijit,
grabs
Abhijit.
part of Eastern Poland.
yeah. I really want to get to that point because the reason is, I think one thing that maybe not enough people talk about is the religious component of the war, because in recent history there's been a lot of issues between the Orthodox Church and the different splits and schisms,
Mm.
and if you know about that, and the Muscovite patriarchy is holdings in Ukraine, or the historic holdings, these new schismatic churches are taken from what the Muscovite church sees to be its historical territory and its historical jurisdiction. So it goes even into the religious aspect of Russia being what you said earlier, a religious identity, because the Russian was an imperial identity tied to the religious life that they inherited from the Byzantine court. Exactly, is the Constantinian Orthodox Christianity is what the Russian state picked up, and that was fundamental to their national identity. And even to this day, with the revival of Russia, post-Soviet era is still part of Putin's plan and the Russian national plan as part of reinvigorating their national identity and establishing the jurisdiction of Russia militarily is a way to secure what they think is their spiritual heritage.
Yeah. So it's I wouldn't. So I've heard a lot of this explanation that Putin is probably trying to recreate Holy Mother Russia as it existed under the Tsars. I would disagree that this comes from a religious angle, though it does prevent. You know, the strongest case you can make against Putin being a madman, uh, the madman hypothesis that you see in the West, is the way he treated Chechens extremely brutally because they're Muslim, they're Turkic Muslim, and the completely different way that he treats Ukrainian Christians. He holds back, he's not as brutal with them. Uh, Affinity, yes. Recreation of the Russian Empire or the USSR, I don't think so. And there's a reason for it because if you
Hey,
look at three different religious splits, if you look at the extreme West, Polish annexed Ukraine is Catholic, it is pure Catholic. Then you have the Ukrainian autocephalous church, which is split into two. They're at each other's throats. There's the external Ukrainian church and the internal, I'm just classifying it generically that way, who are
no,
at each
okay.
other's throats. There are two patriarchs who have been at each other's throats for a long time. And in the East, you have the Moscow denomination, the Moscow Patriarchate. So even in the Kiev Patriarchate, in the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, you have a very deep division where they've been at each other's throats for a while.
Yeah, but they've been adding to the store for a while, right? I'm not saying that the religion. I mean, they okay. Putin himself and his administration always refers to Russia gaining spiritual security. So he's trying. I mean, in a way, he's understanding that you need some level of religiosity or some type of spiritual system in order to have a nation. Because you have to understand them coming out of communism, right? They're in a militant atheist format, and it totally warps their sense of religiosity. So now, it is part. I mean, I think it's a Russian imperial nationalistic goal, but of course they're using religion as part of it, and that's an ancient tactic from states from a long time. So I do think I do think those type of things have a deep undercurrent, because I think conflicts start from cultures, right? We have cultures on the top, but underneath cultures we have deep cultures and spiritual systems. So I think we should always take spiritual systems in account, even when judging geopolitical situations, because it can tell us about the psychology of the people that we're dealing with.
I think
True.
that, wait 1 second, please. I think that is very important. And I've heard from Mr. Pelu and Abhijit. I'd really like to hear a thought from O Blue.
Thanks. Yeah, I want to tie this into the informational aspect of national power, because what Mr. Pelu brought up about Putin saying specific, somewhat spiritually related things. That's part of his narrative. In other words, what Abhijit has brought up is about the spiritual history and how that affects the national identity. There are people in Russia for whom they desire that Holy Mother Russia. There are many different things that he's appealing to as part of his information narrative, and that religious aspect he is definitely appealing to. What Abhijit has indicated is that he doesn't believe that is a driver in Mr. Putin's calculus, if you will. Did I get that right, Abhijit?
Yes, he believes in Chinese-style political control over religion, though he masks it in religiosity.
Okay, so tying that into that informational aspect of the elements of national power, that's what I wanted to take a moment and tie that in, because that is part of the narrative. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's a driver.
Very interesting, very interesting. So, Mr. Pelu, what are your thoughts on Old Blue's explanation?
Yeah, I know it might not be a drive. I mean, I cannot believe it's not a driving force, because people have their cultures and their deep cultures, and people have things that I think the driving force is keeping the Russian identity, but religion and the Orthodox Church is fundamental in the founding of the Russian identity. No matter how much you slice, no matter how you slice it, it's a fundamental part of them. And in rebuilding their culture, they have no other recourse, because people need a certain culture. It's not that it's really. I just think that it's just fundamental to Russian religious cultural identity, the influence of the church. So it might not be the most driving factor, but it's an integral part of psychology, and the psychology is a driving factor. I think the psychology of a people is a driving factor, and you should look at things that indicate their psychology, and one is the religions they're maintaining.
I agree with that, but when I say driver, I'm talking about what is driving the decision making at the Putin level. Okay, because this wasn't something. This was a decision. This wasn't something like there's a broad consensus in Russia that they needed to attack Ukraine. As a matter of fact, many Russians are surprised that they attacked Ukraine. So when I say driver, I'm talking about an immediate driver of the conflict. And I'm not disagreeing with you that it may be a driver for some of the Russian populace that actually supports this invasion, because he has directly appealed to them. And honestly, I mean, over the years, there have been pictures of Putin with Orthodox patriarchs and things like that. He has associated himself with the church. But do I feel like he's a super spiritual guy that's really driven by trying to straighten out the religion of the Ukrainians? No. Just like I don't feel that his appeal to the Russian memory of fascism, and he has directly done that. That's an informational thing. But does it make sense to all of the Russians? No. It does appeal to a certain part of the population that has a very strong memory of the war that they fought against a fascist power. But yet he's invoked fascism as one of the main reasons why he invaded Ukraine. Well, we know that Ukrainians weren't fascist, writ large. I mean, the president is Jewish. It's senseless to us in the West. But he's not talking to us when he talks about that. He's talking to the Russians. Just like when he invokes the Russian Orthodox faith, that's who he's talking to. He's talking to a domestic audience. And he doesn't care whether it appeals to the foreign audience or not. He's got a different part of his story that he addresses towards us. And that is more related towards probably some of the other things that Abhijit is going to discuss when it comes to security. That's
Now,
the part of the narrative he directs at the West.
yeah. But what I'm trying to say is that even someone like Putin considers public opinion in his country. That's why he's appealing to these things. So that means he's appealing to the psychology of his people by addressing their public opinion and trying to at least get popular support somehow, some way.
Oh, he has to.
Oh yeah,
He
yeah.
has to. He has to. I mean, Adolf Hitler had to do the same thing. Mussolini had to do the same thing. You know, Mao had to do the same thing. So you have to talk about things that people are concerned with. But when we look at the specific drivers of this particular conflict, just because it's part of his narrative doesn't mean that it's a driving factor in the reason why he personally made the decision to pull the trigger and invade a sovereign nation.
Okay.
Yeah, no.
One
I
moment,
think
it
that
makes
some of
sense.
the
It makes
other
sense.
things-
gentlemen. One moment, please, gentlemen. For those who are just joining us, what we are discussing at this moment is the war on Ukraine. I should say the war in Ukraine. The title of this program is The War for Ukraine, and it's blood brothers. That in itself, I have to say, was even challenged because of the play on words with the war for Ukraine, emphasis on the word for. But we will discuss that a little bit later. What I'd like to see happen at this point is I would like to see 𝐁𝐿𝐫𝐷 explain the Eastern perspective, and 𝐿_BLUE, if you would please explain the Western perspective. So in this particular case, 𝐿_BLUE, since you just got done speaking, I'm going to have 𝐁𝐿𝐫𝐷 speak now.
Thank you, Coach. If I can just add a teeny little sliver to what was just discussed prior. If you look at the way Putin dealt with Chechnya, if you look at what Boris Yeltsin used to say and Putin used to say, they want to de-Wahhabize. They used to keep referring to Chechens. They would always make a difference. There are Chechens and there are Wahhabists. And all their venom was reserved for Wahhabists. But once they managed to pacify Chechnya, what Ramzan Kadyrov follows in Chechnya today is trenchant Wahhabism. It's just that it's Moscow denomination Wahhabism. Moscow determines what happens out there. So I would agree with 𝐿_BLUE here. He's using religion as a rhetorical device, as a justification device. Now, when it comes to the Eastern point of view, remember the East, there is no single point of view here. We're so divided. We hate China. China hates us. We fought just last year. The Chinese killed about 20 of our troops. The problem is there is a convergence of interests, even though there is a significant difference of why we are doing what we're doing. India's primary fear, we're a continental power. Britain and America have always been offshore balancers. They use their navy and aircraft carriers and things like that. We fight on land. We're a land power. And for us, the nightmare is to have Russia and China together. It is so scary for us that we will do whatever is required, including grovel, beg, steal, burn all our other bridges just to keep Russia and China apart. This has been the guiding principle of Indian foreign policy for the last 70 years. And to this effect, in the 1950s, what we would do is we'd be extremely obsequious to the Russians. Say, oh, Americans are imperialists. But when you invade Hungary, you're not imperialists, you're liberators. And the Russians would be, hey, see, good Indians. Indians understand us. See, they're so unique. Good boy, good democracy. And India being a democracy was a great sense of validation to them. Then we would play mischief. We would go to Beijing and say, look at these horrible white Russians. They don't acknowledge you as the true leader of the communist world, which we think you are, and therefore you should be the leader of Asia. And so we try to push Mao Zedong into a role that would either undermine or contradict Stalin. And it took on a completely new life when Khrushchev took over power from Stalin ultimately. So our
Mm.
policy in Asia has always been divide and rule. For us, Russia and China coming together is a nightmare, and we will do whatever is required to keep those two countries separate. China has a slightly different policy. They don't believe in allies. They believe in free radicals. That is to say, crazy, what we think of as crazy, powerful local states that keep China's competitors off balance. So they use North Korea to perpetually keep Japan and South Korea off balance. They use Pakistan to perpetually keep India off balance. If required, they'll supply you with nuclear weapons, but mostly it works through not China being the disruptor of the status quo, but the local client state being an extremely risk accepting violator of the status quo. And I guess that's what you're looking at Russia become now because of these sanctions. A very big Pakistan or a very big North Korea. Heavily sanctioned, heavily isolated, uh, heavily risk taking. For the rest of Asia, uh, they really don't care. This isn't an issue for them except for oil, gas, and commodity prices. And Africa, I think, is the least concerned about all of this because I've been following the Nigerian press for a while. And the Seychelles, I know Seychelles and Mauritius aren't exactly on everybody's radar, but there is a certain similarity in Seychelles and Mauritius in the Indian Ocean on the one hand, and Nigeria on the Pacific on the other, where you're seeing
Atlantic.
on the Atlantic, sorry. You're seeing amusement almost. It's like, oh, look at these strange people. They're having a war. What is this? It doesn't really concern us. So let's mind our own business. And the only thing they're concerned about is, like I said, oil and commodities prices, like in a sense, ASEAN is. So uh, it's it's either indifference or in India's case, it's alarm which needs to placate Russia, or in China's case, it is glee, a hidden, unexpressed glee, which they're thinking, yay, now we have a major league pariah state that's going to do more or less what we tell it to do.
Oh my goodness. Um, you gave so much information in your summation. It was quite overwhelming. The cat and mouse game that is being played is, I just had no idea. I absolutely had no idea. So it's very eye opening. Oh, Blue, would you please share the Western perspective as you understand it? And then, Mr. Pelu, I would like you to please take over the questioning.
Okay. The West views this potentially as a continuation of the Soviet Union, or potentially basically getting the band back together. I think there are a lot of people in the West who view Putin as having basically announced that he plans to get the band back together. And, that is actually a phrase that you hear some of the foreign policy wonks using, specifically getting the band back together, essentially reestablishing the Russian Empire, as it were, and being in direct competition to the same level, it seems, with the West as the Soviet Union did. We view the relationship between China and Russia, which is typically bordered on adversarial, if not been outright adversarial. They did fight a border war in 1968 against each other. It was a hot war. It was was brief, but they killed each other on the border between Russia and China, and we were pretty comfortable with that. However, seeing the new relationship where essentially China has just signed a couple of extra trade deals with Russia. They upped their coal buy. They're upping their petroleum buy. There's been conversation that they will form their own payment system, or that there is a payment system either developed or in development that the Chinese will just say, that's fine. We'll just form essentially our own economic sphere with you. I think there may be concerns about how we should deal with China in relation to this. And I know there's been some, again, a kind of a crossover between the diplomatic and the information aspects of national power. There have been comments made from both sides about, well, maybe we should sanction the Chinese. And then the Chinese saying, well, we would react very negatively to that. And oh, by the way, anybody who helps, I think it was a recent exchange, an Australian government member made a statement about, we will do anything necessary to help Taiwan protect themselves, which was then followed by a public statement by the Chinese saying it won't go well for anybody who helps Taiwan, should we decide to take our wayward province back. So we see the developing codependence between China and Russia, which, given Abhijit's input there, is kind of makes that make a little bit more sense when you see the Eastern perspective and what our concern is. Why would China encourage a country that the rest of the world is viewing as a pariah at the moment? Well, I think his explanation makes it make a bit of sense. I think that there's a tendency in the West to say, we recognize this problem and we know how to deal with it, rather than recognizing that, well, this is an inherently different problem from the problem with the Soviet Union. And if you treat it exactly the same way, you might not get the kind of, the West views itself as having won the Cold War. I don't know.
Okay. Blue. I want to ask you this. And just like you said, they think they won the war, right? They think they won the war, but look, we have the West. Like, what's the West? It's America, right? So we have America now. There's other power, like there's America. When America thinks they won the war, you think no other country is going to come up? Like, yes, the Soviets might have, the Soviet Union, yes, did fall, but don't you think a new Russia could come up the same way a new China could come up, the same way a new the same way a new India can come up? There's going to be emerging powers, and America and the West in particular, and that whole sphere of influence is going to have to understand it still might be the dominant power in the world, but they're going to have to accept some level of multipolarity. What do you think about that, Blue? And Abhijit respond to it. And Abhijit, please respond to it after Blue. Thanks a lot.
Okay, good question. The things are always going to change. Okay. I think that in the West, though, I think that we if you look at like the people that analyze this situation, the pundits, the people that are out there telling their stories, telling their viewpoints on it. You can go to any television, any network news channel, or you can go all over YouTube and find pundits of various qualifications talking about it, sometimes for hours on end. And I guess in a sense, that's kind of what we're doing here. But among the folks that might get called in by one of the major networks in the United States, they look at this problem through the lens of what our most recent experience has been. right? So while the West feels that they won the Cold War because the Soviet Union collapsed, Putin specifically has said that the world needs to be bipolar, that there need to be two great powers, because one great power, and it's unstable. It's kind of like a disc that has a weight on one side of it. He feels that he needs to be that weight on the opposite side, and he has said that on a number of occasions. So part of the question here, whether you agree with that being a good or a bad thing or not, it is part of the dynamic, and it is at least part of the reason, it is part of the calculus that went into the decision for Russia to invade Ukraine. This is, Putin, one of the things, and I think that this is going to have reverberations for quite some time in foreign policy, is the two schools of foreign policy, realism and liberalism, which don't mean the same thing that they would in domestic politics. You can be domestic, you can be a conservative and still have a liberal outlook on international relations. Just liberal in that sense means a belief in the power of international organizations like the UN, of institutions and agreements, and some kind of rule of law between nation states. Whereas realism acknowledges that those things exist, but essentially bases its outlook on power relationships.
Okay.
Defense.
So
the two different schools of thoughts here. I think that what discredit liberalism for quite some time, and that's kind of a shame because it's not like it doesn't have any validity.
Hey, Blue. Okay, yes. Thanks, Blue. Because I'm sorry, but I just want to get some comments from Abhijit on the matter of multipolarity in the current world and the current situation and in the upcoming situation, near and far.
Right. So, our view on multipolarity, remember, I can only talk about India out here. India goes around screaming, saying, oh, look, we're so important. We're like 1/7 of humanity. Take us seriously. The problem is we're a third world country. So, we're kind of an afterthought for almost everybody in the room. That being said, we've had a very ambiguous attitude towards multipolarity. We were very comfortable in a bipolar world where there was Russia and America, or rather the USSR and America. We are not so comfortable in a world where that bipolarity revolves around America and China, because the second pole always has to be distant from us. Both poles need to be distant from us. Think of it as the North Pole and the South Pole. India wants to be on the equator. That's the optimal Indian situation. So when we talk about multipolarity, it always involved taking power away from China, or to use Old Blues terminology, to entrap China in liberalism and take it away from cold calculus realism. We used it as a kind of a rhetorical trap for China. And for us, the fear now is that if Russia is willing to act out like that, if these multilateral traps don't work with Russia, are they actually going to work with China at all? In which case, have the last 20, 30 years of Indian diplomacy been a complete waste of time? It's almost an existential crisis for us, that we're thinking, what just happened? Is this going to happen to us? We're literally in panic. You're not seeing it? I mean, I've been talking to the foreign ministry on and off since this started off. There is real panic out there. And there's a lot of anger directed at America, because the belief is that America, in many ways, starting off in undermining the UN Charter through doctrines like humanitarian intervention and responsibility to protect, which it applied in Kosovo and Bosnia, and then in Syria and Libya, has brought about a weakening of post-Cold War international norms that essentially led up to this situation. So there's fear of China, a sense of abandonment by Russia, and anger at America here.
Okay, so wouldn't all that indicate the need for multipolarity? Because if you don't see the pole, sometimes you have to be the pole. You have to be the pole. India has to be a pole. Major country has to be a pole. The drive to hegemony is something that's always been in human civilization. The drive to hegemony has always been there because nations will naturally seek their best interest in especially in their foreign policy. They will seek their best interest. They'll seek to maintain their sovereignty. They'll seek to maintain their power base. So Abhijit, real quick, answer me. Is multipolarity a necessity? Is it a necessity? Is it an inevitability? And should we cancel all other ways of thinking right now because we have to deal with the reality of the world before us?
I think we're looking not at multipolarity anymore. I think this has kind of split the world into two, in a sense, this invasion. So what we're looking at is a 2.5 polarity. It's not entirely multipolarity. It's still going to be China versus America, but that China angle is going to have a very significant 1.5 element to it, which is going to be very, very pronounced in international diplomacy now. The joke used to be that Britain is America's unsinkable aircraft carrier, the USS United Kingdom. I think Russia has taken on that role for China in a much more dangerous way than the United Kingdom. This is sort of like the German, the wolf pack submarine hunting in mid-Atlantic, aggressive, crazy, psycho commando. All those vibes, all those scary Castle Wolfenstein vibes.
So if we haven't connected the dots yet, what we should understand is that there is a true connection between Russia and China. Is that correct?
Correct. It is a monopsonistic situation. It is not something that a Europeanist like Putin ever wanted, but it is something that he will now see as an inevitability. And that would have been a huge, bitter personal pill for him to swallow because he is fundamentally Europe obsessed. He is a Europeanist. He believes in Europe's civilizing mission, more so than Russia's even. And therein lies the tragedy of all of this.
Oh my goodness.
That's interesting. First of all, I'd like to say, Mr. Pelu, you've identified yourself clearly as a realist in your approach to international relations, because of that, you discussed power relationships and hegemony and things like that, and that's the way that realists view international relations, as essentially an anarchy where power relationships tip the scales, and there is validity. There is a tremendous amount of validity to that outlook, but what I was mentioning before was that liberal international relations outlook, with that dependence on international norms, or heavy reliance on international norms and international organizations and things like that, viewing the world as we can get together and do positive things through these organizations. That viewpoint, which fell into huge disfavor after World War II, in the West at least, you see our foreign policy was dominated by realists, and then later heavily criticized after the fall of the Soviet Union. We began to liberalize foreign policy, at least in most people's minds, where the UN was actually some people in the United States fear the UN. And because they viewed it as being potentially given that much legitimacy to where it could literally tell the people of the United States how to live. That viewpoint, that liberal viewpoint of working towards those international norms and governance, if you will, and rule of law, that viewpoint is going to be as damaged by what Russia is doing currently as it was following World War II, when liberalism is associated with Chamberlain getting off the plane, waving a piece of paper and announcing we will have peace in our time.
I mean, so again,
Incredible. We're at a point in the program, and we are going to keep going, but I want to thank everyone who is viewing us and who has come to share their ideas. Part of our community is called Loveland, and it is a place where we gather to continue talking about these particular ideas. And we have a member of Loveland who has stepped up to express his thoughts and feelings on the program. We will go back to our guests in just a moment, but Joe, please do come up.
Hello, good evening, guys. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure. Just I hear what you guys are saying, and I got a few words. It's so sad and it breaks my heart seeing what's going on with Ukraine and Russia. There's no need for this. There really is no need for this. The innocent people that are dying each and every day. And I wish people can just find a solution to come together and find love and peace again. It hurts to see people in Ukraine dying, starvation, people begging for their homes again. You look at the Middle East, you look at everything. Everything is so sad right now. It breaks my heart. And I hope that Russia and the Ukrainians can find a deal and move forward. That's all I have to say.
Thank you so much, Joe. I appreciate you so much. All right.
Anytime, we just got to come together, find love and find peace. And, you know, what goes on. We don't have any control, but we have our freedom what to say. And from there, we shall see what goes on, right?
Excellent. We shall see. We shall see. Sorry about that. Oops. Thank you. Thank you, I should say. Hopefully you can still hear me. We have here Julia Bennis, and she is also a community member in Loveland. But not only that, she is from Ukraine. And so she has a particular mindset about this issue, and she just wanted to give us a little feedback.
Hi. Thanks for bringing me up on here. I appreciate it. So, yeah, there's a lot, obviously. I'm not a politician. I'm not an expert in anything military or anything you're really talking about. I'm just a person, a human, and someone who was born in Ukraine. My mom was born in Ukraine. We lived in the Baltic states and Latvia. But someone who has been through or lived through the Soviet Union, we escaped, we came here to United States in 1989 before the collapse of Soviet Union. So we, as Jewish people, have escaped basically because it was very anti-Semitic and it was very hard for Jewish people to get anywhere ahead. And there was a lot of suppression of everything. So, it's, for me personally, what I've been doing the last 2 weeks is the only way that I know how to cope with things is by helping others and getting involved and organizing translations, documents, wiring money to the right people to get aid, medical especially. And at this point, it's just getting worse and worse. So, it's hard. It's hard to see not just the fact that these are my people, right? But just on a human level. So there's been a lot of comparison of what is going on in Ukraine now to what's been going on in the Middle East. And that's probably a whole other conversation, And there is no comparison, right? The whole Israeli-Palestinian conflict and everything. So I'm not even going to go into that. I think it's completely irresponsible for people to even bring that up. I'm just going to put that out there because for many reasons. But I just want to say, I appreciate you having this conversation. I appreciate you shedding the light. I appreciate you giving people, a place to. This is very therapeutic for those of us that are from there, because I literally was about to get onto a plane and just go there and just volunteer, but instead I donated that money because me purchasing a flight from California all the way to Ukraine or Poland or wherever it is, they could use that money instead. So, but I'm doing what I can, and I appreciated the conversation. So, now I don't have a question. I just, oh, sorry, I thought that was to me. What is your question? I don't have a question. I just do appreciate, and I hope we can include more people. And I think the biggest thing I want to say is we slowly are starting to see the hatred in the United States towards Russian people, which I completely understand where that's coming from. But what I think people don't realize is that most people in Ukraine actually speak Russian, because everybody spoke Russian in the former Soviet Union. We went to Poland, we went to Hungary. Even there, people could understand Russian because it was such a domineering, language, and everybody had to at least understand it and speak it. So I just hope that people in the United States are not that ignorant to start boycotting Russian stores and Russian products. Yes, Russian products that are in Russia, and being exported here. That's fine. I get it. But first find out who it's owned by. I mean, people who started boycotting the particular brand of vodka that has never been owned by a Russian company. It's actually a guy in Latvia who owns it. So I want people to educate themselves first. I really hope there's no
How do you see this affecting?
I'm sorry?
I think one's mic was messing up. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. So anyway, that's just, my 2 cents.
Well, you have certainly brought a personal touch. I mean, your family is from Ukraine. You are from Ukraine, and you gave us an understanding that you can be Jewish. You can have lived in Ukraine and been part of the Soviet Union. And so this is very taxing for you mentally and emotionally. Yes?
Yeah, it's and thank you for saying that. And you did ask me that. You did ask me how is this affecting you? And I honestly, I didn't even know how to answer you, because I think I've run out of tears, because that's really where my mind goes. And just helping, being there, being present, and responding to calls for help, for translation, for organizing, whatever it is that they need, I'm there. It's incredibly personal. Obviously, I spent every summer in Ukraine with my grandparents. We were shipped off to communist camps, summer camps there every summer. In fact, the way I speak Russian, people in Russia and Latvia made fun of me because I speak with a Ukrainian dialect, whatever you call it. Kids would make fun of me because that's how my mom speaks, the way they spoke in Ukraine, So these are my people. And of course, I feel for them. The whole fascist thing that Putin has, been talking about, and that it's all fascists there and Nazis and whatever. Where are there no Nazis? I mean, I live, 10 miles from the KKK headquarters in Huntington Beach in California, they're everywhere. Look what happened in Greece. So that gives you the right to invade and try. I mean, there's 100 of them, 200, I don't know what the number was, maybe thousands, but how does that give you a platform and the right to invade and start bombing civilians? There's so much to that. And even as a Jewish person, it's like, really, that's your platform. That's really what you're putting out there. It's all bullshit. And it's sad. My son and I were watching until they shut down Russian television on YouTube. the Russian news, where Putin literally goes out on there and talks like an anchor for hours at a time. And we sat there, we really wanted to hear in Russian what he was saying, not translations, not, subtitles. And he is literally sitting there going, do you remember the good old glory days of Soviet Union? Do you remember how we were all together, Ukraine and the Baltics and Kazakhstan and Armenia and Azerbaijan and all of those republics, right? And I'm sitting there going, this is it. This is it. My thought has always been is that there's two reasons why he did this. One, he truly wants to get the band back together, so to speak. And two, the dude couldn't stand the fact that a Jew is running a country of Ukraine, the biggest country of Soviet, the old Soviet bloc, where there were over 400,000 Jewish people. It's the third, I believe, it's the third largest country with Jewish people. You think they would still be there if it was fascist and Nazis and whatever it is? He just couldn't stand it. That's just my own personal opinion. Again, that's probably very stupid and shallow, but yeah. Anyway, I could go on for hours.
Well, that's fine. I really appreciate your personal thought and how intimate you have been with us. I appreciate you very much. Mr. Pelu, who has been the producer of this program, as you see, Mr. Pelu, you do have a question that is hanging back from 𝐔𝐤𝐫𝐾, but I did want to come back to you so that you could direct the questions from here.
Yeah. So all this being said, isn't this more reason for us to be realist in our understanding of geopolitics? Because it's real. We have to understand every real motivation, every real threat, every real issue. Putin and them, they might be using propaganda and this, that, and the third. When they're talking to their people, they might be trumping things up for domestic consumption. But in the end of the day, there is they're not going to war for no reason. Whenever you go to war, is a possibility of taking losses. They're not taking losses for no reason. It's something they really want. Something they really want out of this war. And if we are to avoid these type of things in the future, we should understand the motivations of all the players most accurately, so we can make the best policies to accommodate people who have the ability to act geopolitically to the point of being able to launch military expeditions, especially under a nuclear umbrella, the way Russia the way Russia is. Blue, can you speak to that?
Oh, no. I mean, I think you've got a good point, is that realism should always be part of, you can't ignore those power relationships. You can't ignore that these relationships exist. And as 𝐁𝐵𝐃 demonstrated, sometimes go back millennia, some of these relationships and competitions and so on. So, yeah, I mean, keeping that always has to be a part of it. But what we've seen here is kind of a sea change in one respect, which is that in previous interferences of one power or group of powers into the internal affairs of a region or a specific nation state, think, 𝐁𝐵𝐃 brought up two of them, and I would submit Iraq, Afghanistan, Bosnia, Serbia. Those were all discussed beforehand in the United Nations, and cases were made for why action was needed. And not disregarding his comments on the humanitarian reasoning behind some of these interferences. This is different in that there was no complaint made. in the official forum. There were complaints made on the world stage informationally, but it's not like Russia went to the United Nations and said, we have a grievance. We see something in Ukraine that needs to be fixed. And we demand that the world recognize this and perhaps even authorize us to take action to resolve this grievance that we've recognized. That did not happen. And that is international liberalism also has a point in that in order to get someplace as humanity, there's going to be need to communicate. There's going to be need to have international norms. There's going to need to, I don't know about international, like a world government, but significant compliance, at least by the major players, with these norms and what we'd like to call laws. But, are there any real laws in anarchy? Mr. Putin has just demonstrated that no, there isn't. And basically what makes him right in the end is I've got nuclear weapons. So if you interfere with me, I might just clobber your entire civilization. So are you willing to risk that in order to support this or fight for this country physically, that you don't have any defense treaties with, that you arguably don't have any national strategic interest in? So
Yes.
he's literally daring the rest of the world to take action.
Okay. Thanks. Great commentary, Old Blue. Hey, Abhijit, how you feel with the notion that the political realism is a necessity?
I think more than a necessity, it's think of it this way. I'm going to make my explanation a bit anthropomorphic. Think of realism as the real nature of a human being, which is essentially an evolved primate who still has extremely violent tendencies. And you need the ruse of laws, religion, etc., to control that violent evolved chimpanzee. I think the fight is constantly going to be between, religion, law, concoctions like human rights, laws, human rights. These are all human inventions. They're as notional as, say, paper money or the intrinsic value of money. You need that to control. Now, the problem is the nature of a state is always predatory and violent. We have evolved these patterns of behavior that kind of keep us under control, that, kind of keep the collective violent chimpanzee under control. The problem is that when somebody decides that some laws are worth breaking for the greater common good, you've then, let the animals out of the zoo. And that's unfortunately what's been happening with human. I think of all the things that triggered Putin to go this way, other than his own specific security concerns with NATO expansion eastwards, it also had to do with a lot of the humanitarian intervention. Take Kosovo specifically. With Kosovo, what happened was, you say that, responsibility to protect humanitarian intervention is very important. Remember, NATO went into Kosovo for far less human lives than have been lost in eastern Ukraine over the last 8 years in Donetsk and Lugansk. More Russians have been killed there than Kosovars were killed. NATO went in. Now, responsibility to protect allows you to go in and prevent massacres and genocide from happening. It doesn't allow you to go create a completely sovereign new nation, which is what NATO did. They created Kosovo, which is a violation of the UN Charter, technically. So that was an egregious violation of the UN Charter. The second issue was you will always hear this promise given to Gorbachev. Now, Gorbachev doesn't have written proof of this, that NATO would not expand east. So every time the Russians say this, America says, show us the paperwork. Where did we ever sign up to this? The problem is, it was the exact reverse of that used in Libya. If you look at the UN resolution on Libya, it called for a ceasefire. There was no mention of regime change. Instead, what ended up happening was America went in and did regime change under the guise of a ceasefire. So there have been so many violations of international law. Now, if you look at targeted assassinations, drones, the Israelis started off targeted assassinations against the Hamas leadership and things like that. And their belief was there is a rule in international law. If you do things often enough, it has a normative value equivalent to jurisprudence. I think American humanitarian intervention happened often enough to erode that set of laws which we had held as being the new normal after 1991, after the Cold War, where we thought, oh, there's this bright new world awaiting us at the end of the rainbow. And sadly, it wasn't the rainbow for too many people around, and Russia drew all the wrong lessons. You'll always have that class bully.
That's
Okay.
very, that's
Okay.
very,
So Silos, right? Yeah.
yes.
I was just about to, say Silos. I heard you had a question, Silos. Thank you for coming.
Yes, I do. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Do you hear me? Okay, fine. All right. Yes, I for some reason it's very loud on my end. Everyone speaking sounds so loud on my end, but great. Well, thank you very much for allowing me to first of all ask a question and also make a comment. I'm a candidate for ambassadorship with the African Union, so I sit every week, every Monday and Wednesday at the summit, online with the summit and the parliament that I am embarking in the African Union. It's also have a lot. We have a lot of ambassadors that sits in the world peace, and we deal a lot with the United Nations and the ambassadors, right? And so I'm going to view this from that perspective, you know what I'm saying, and also from an historical perspective. I don't watch the news that much, so I know what's happening with Russia, Ukraine, China, with Taiwan. So, but I don't watch the news because I don't rely on that particular news to give me the proper information that we need. You know what I'm saying? That's just the way I am. I just don't see that happening. But I do like to visit sites like the World Economic Forum, the different international sites. I do visit that, and I study intensively on social studies and stuff like that as a student at NYU. So this is what I want to say. When you see a civilization, before I ask my question, it's going to lead up to what my question is about the fourth industrial revolution, how this impacts it. But when you see civilization, you study the different civilizations. Before a civilization gets to the point where it starts declining, and you can also look at it like, for instance, the other podcast that was on here about astronomy. So that deals a lot with it. When you look at, because at one time, I don't know if you remember, a couple of years ago, there was this whole big talk about the conjunction, how the planets were lining up and the resetting, the currency reset from the United Nations, from the debt facility organization at the United Nations. So it was like a reset of things. The economics was reset. And this is the thing that happened globally. That was the narrative. That was the talk. Everything was being reset globally around the world. you know what I'm saying, economically. So what I'm seeing now and reading in the World Economic Forum that it 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 devastated a lot of the economics, especially in China. They're seeing a drop in their manufacturing, their economics. Russia also. And then when you look at Ukraine in the United Nations, Ukraine was on top of the list of the development of sustainable energy. You know what I'm saying? And so you see this happening. So it's a change of guard. And so when that happens, and if you have a country like Russia or China relying so much on fossil fuel, and they're seeing a drop in that in the Middle East, they're going to get upset, or they're going to try to preserve themselves, because in humanity, that's what moves us to sometimes like what's his name? Ashish said about the chimpanzee acting violently, because every human, every family, every nation wants to preserve itself. And so when they rely so much on the economics, relying, which is normal, which is the proper thing to do, it's economics at the end of the day. And then when that happens and there's a reset, it kind of like sets off war. War is a money machine. You know what I'm saying? In other words,
I really agree with you on that. I also want to let everyone know that 𝐁𝐿𝐫 is a member of the Loveland community, and he is a honeybee. So I thank you so much for coming up. You had a very specific question that you wanted to ask Old Blue. Please do so.
Yes. So what the question I asked is, so how does this impact that fourth industrial revolution? You know what I'm saying? And that is the Internet of Things that changed. Because I'm seeing a lot of commercials now about the electric cars. They're rolling out the electric cars. So that means all the fossil fuels is going to be gone. So how do you feel? How is this impacting, the fourth industrial revolution and the development of sustainable energy and if you know what the fourth, I'm not sure that everyone knows what the fourth industrial revolution is by now. You know what I'm saying? So
if you could give us at least your working definition to start with, that would be awesome.
My working definitions of what? Of the fourth industrial revolution?
Yes.
Okay. Well, it's the Internet of Things, the introduction of blockchain technology, cryptocurrency, sustainable energy, getting away from fossil fuel and getting into sustainable energy, wind energy, solar technology. It's that industrial, electronics. It's the Internet of Things. It's the, so we went from a mechanical industry back in 100 years ago when it came to the introduction of machinery. But now we're coming into the introduction of what's the proper term for that? The cryptocurrency, Internet of Things, the technology right now. You know what I'm saying? That we're in front of, like the electric cars as opposed to the fossil fuel cars.
Do global supply chains, do they feature in the fourth industrial revolution?
Global supply chain. Can you define that? What do you mean by global supply chain? I mean, it would impact that if I'm getting where you're coming from that, but explain that.
Global supply chain.
Yes.
You may have, for instance, iPhones are manufactured in China. Not all of the components for that iPhone are manufactured in China. As a matter of fact, there's a great dependence on, somebody decided that it was a great idea to centralize chip manufacture in Taiwan. Although we used to manufacture chips in the United States, and this is originally where chips were manufactured, but that's been offshored. So offshoring, it has a tendency to basically send manufacturing jobs to developing economies where labor is cheaper. But a lot of international corporation activity things crossing oceans and so forth, either by sea or by air, and the ability to transport massive amounts of things by air as compared to in the past. So
yes, that is
that's
fourth
what I mean
industrial
by global
revolution.
supply chain.
Yes, yes, it is. It
That,
definitely, yes, it does. It impact.
okay.
That's the fourth
So
industrial revolution
so
deals with. Yes.
your question was, if I'm getting it right,
Mhm.
how do these recent events
Exactly.
impact that future? And
Yes. Yes. Yes.
I think that that is dovetailed in with the damage that is done to international liberalism. Okay, liberalism and realism as outlooks on the relationships between nation states have typically, honestly, I think that a productive outlook is kind of a balance between the two. Um, a lot of people criticize American foreign policy during the Cold War. I criticize it because,
Right.
for instance, it's what brought us to participate, basically not participate, instigate the installation of the Shah of Iran, for instance, backing right-wing dictators instead of communist dictators in our proxy struggles, right? There's no doubt that South Vietnam, it wasn't run by a bunch of nuns and priests, right? It wasn't done. It wasn't just a bunch of good little people running that place. It was very corrupt. And a lot of people saw that as being just realist to the max. Because, but World War II, again, when Chamberlain got off the plane waving that paper, when Hitler invaded Poland and later took over France, anybody who would get off a plane waving a piece of paper saying we have peace in our time, nobody wanted to hear that. Nobody believed it. Okay, so the damage to global supply chains began, I think, as part of the response to COVID. When we here in the United States, I think many people remain offended by the whole concept that none of our PPE was domestically manufactured.
Right.
Why are we depending on China for personal protective equipment? Why are we depending on China for all of our antibiotics, not just a few, literally all? Say again.
If I may interrupt, not only the damage, but the control of the global supply chain. It's in question here.
Well, what they're realizing is
that
you don't control the global supply chain, and the reason is because you can't determine those global events. And so, a company that feels like it's absolutely in control of what is going on, suddenly now is realizing it doesn't have
but
that.
I believe you can instigate global events. You can. What's that?
Okay. Abhijit, how you feel about this global supply chain, global commerce, the real world effects that are taking place right now because of this conflict, the real world effects that's going to affect near future, mid future, and distant future, but the permanent, the short range and permanent effects to all human development right now. Like this war, how far does the reverberations of this war go, and how does it affect everything that we're coming into as a human society?
So I personally feel that we're looking at the beginning of the end of globalization. And see, that was going to happen irrespective because of additive 3D manufacturing and things like that. Because, the first things that were going to get replaced in 3D manufacturing were the sort of low quality products where China started off its manufacturing prowess, toothbrushes, light bulbs, simple things like that. 3D manufacturing has to progress a lot to be able to do complete manufacturing in that sense. But what it can do is start off by replacing the lower end. So India's inability in the last 70 years to enter manufacturing gets deeply affected. Now, India has to look for other sources of growth. China, which based its growth on these low products, now it's moved kind of to a middle quality production rung. It's going to have a lot of its wealth probably taken away from it in terms of 3D manufacturing when 3D manufacturing matures somewhat. This was kind of a foregone conclusion. The problem is the global system was based on a perpetual expansion of the economy. The premise of it was growth, 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 growth. And this was the genius of America. Because remember, Britain wasn't a capitalist power, it was a mercantilist power. It colonized other countries to create markets for its own products. America didn't do that. America was a pure capitalist power. It created markets so that they would become more and more wealthy to absorb products, but they could also enter the production. So everybody grows together. The first impact of all of this is, and it's very curious that Silos brought up, I'm not going to get into the Internet of Things, but I'm going to get into the information age in general, is that what you're going to see is a splitting of the internet. China already has the Great Wall of China. Russia, because it's been banned from YouTube and things like that. Russia today has been banned from YouTube. Russians have been banned from TikTok, etc., what have you. You're going to see a fundamental fracturing of the internet. That's where it's going to start. India is in so much alarm over what YouTube and Twitter and things like that have done to Russian handles and Russian media and things. We're coming up with a data localization law either next week or next month, which will force everybody, Google, Amazon, Facebook, Twitter, everyone, to localize their data in India. All right. So anything to do with India, Indian data, Indian generated user content, Indian everything will have to be stored on servers in India. And that is the beginning of the end of globalization. How is it going to go? Where is it going to go? I don't know, but I think this dream of perpetual growth, which in the West was under stress. You know, everybody talks about China's economic growth being unsustainable because of the overspending on infrastructure that started in 2008. Remember, the West's debt-fueled growth has been equally unsustainable. You can't survive on that kind of a debt-equity ratio. We can't just keep pretending that debt to equity can be stretched indefinitely and perpetuate growth. So as much as we see structural catastrophe in China, I see fiscal catastrophe in the West. And India, of course, gets left out of everything because we're always the last man on or last person on the block. Because, you know, to quote the former Israeli Foreign Minister Abba Eban, I forgot the quote now. What was it? It was such a lovely quote. It's such one of those saucy things that only an Israeli foreign minister could come up with. They never. Okay, I'll get back to it when I remember it. Damn.
Okay.
I thank you for that.
I was about to answer. I was about to get to. I was about to get to NN. I'm sorry. I was just about to get to NN's question. Yep. Thanks for pulling up, Coach Love, and everybody. Give a special shout out to NN. He's been instrumental in helping us put it together. He's our production assistant. He's been very instrumental. So give a shout out to NN. Yes. So NN's asking. Also asked Abhijit, how she. I assume he's talking about Xi Jinping, the president of China. How she betrayed Ukraine for all the times Ukraine backed Xi against India. Does this suggest that China is an unreliable ally?
China has always been an unreliable ally. Like I said, remember when I brought in China? China does not believe in allies. They believe in empowering free radicals. So you remember how in a Batman movie, Joker gives every criminal in town guns and says, go berserk.
Mm-hmm.
So China is like Joker. The gun that China provides is the nuclear weapon. All right, they're very happy to proliferate nuclear weapons. And their thing is just go berserk. The more their client states destabilize, the happier they are. So if anybody thought of China, I think if you look at Pakistan's history with China or North Korea's history with China, what kind of an ally allows you to get sanctioned? What kind of an ally allows you to get threatened with invasion?
I heard what you
China.
said, and
Yeah.
I just need you to repeat that uh, again, because you said that China wants things destabilized.
Correct. China does want things destabilized. And it's not a business point of view, it's just a fundamental uh, Chinese strategic thought point of view. Because every time they've
Fact.
had
Yeah.
strong neighbors, they've been invaded by those strong neighbors. So, what they see is you perpetually need to keep your neighbor, anything strong on your periphery needs to be kept off balance.
So
Not
is this
destroyed, because they want your markets, but you need to be kept off balance. You need to be bogged down. Think of it this way. Uh, y- y- you want you don't want to kill the guy next door because he's buying your strawberries or peaches or whatever it is you're selling. But if somebody put a shot through his hand, that might not be such a bad thing because he'll still buy your strawberries, except he won't be in a position to whack you over your head with a tennis racket or something like that. Kind of like
so?
that.
Is this policy in writing somewhere, or is this just commonly known by
It
people?
is, well, it is kind of in writing. So I think Alistair Ian Johnston of Harvard's put this. It's a fat book called China's Strategic Culture.
Mhm.
That's
He
right.
has put it
Right.
down in writing. But even if you look empirically at how they treat their allies,
Mhm.
abandon them at crucial moments, uh, they uh, they believe in empowering crazy people. So empirically, if you look at it, I would just urge anyone to just do a basic Wikipedia of Pakistan-China relations or North Korea-China relations. Or their great ally once upon a time used to be Romania under Ceausescu. Who had a split with Moscow within the communist whole, or Enver Hoxha in Albania. They pick and choose really, really weird allies they traditionally have, and they do like to destabilize. So I'm not surprised that he did what he did to Ukraine. Not that Ukraine was all that supportive of Xi. They were kind of on the fence. It doesn't matter. I don't think we should ever approach foreign policy through Schadenfreude. Oh, Ukraine supported them against us, therefore Ukraine deserves this. No, I think you do need to have certain principles and look at the larger picture, but it is what it is.
So I have one more follow-up question, and then I want to get to Anand's second question. You described India's policy basically in a mischievous manner earlier, basically keeping um, them unstable. Are you essentially using their playbook against them? Or, I mean, I'm trying to understand how it's very different.
No, India's playbook isn't instability. We like stability.
Okay.
Uh, the thing is, we like stability, but that doesn't mean we like poles emerging that don't favor us.
Mm-hmm.
So we will try everything possible to break up a Russia-China axis. But mind you, when China wanted a trade bloc, we didn't do anything to block it because we see trade as fundamentally good. It connects all of us. It imposes certain behavioral constraints on you that you don't go berserk and go around invading people. So uh, it's it's not as zero sum game as China. It's just that sometimes when one country is too much of a threat, you need to do something. You need to keep some kind of insurance in place.
I see. I see. And we have Annan's second question here. Has Putin already militarily won? Is there a way to beat Putin? Is there a way to beat Putin in this war?
Do you remember that famous scene in Star Trek where they're playing 10-dimensional chess and Mr.
Mhm.
Spock is being all logical? And the chap who defeats him because he's not playing to logic.
I see.
So here's the thing, we're assuming that Putin wants a certain set of things. What if he doesn't want those things? I don't think
Mhm.
Putin's won militarily yet. I think there's going to be a very long, drawn out conflict like Chechnya. Russia spent almost, 15, 20 years trying to pacify Chechnya. I think they'll spend at least that long, if not longer, trying to pacify Ukraine. But you can't checkmate a man who is playing, you're playing chess, he's playing Chinese checkers. We're playing two different games. So how are
So
you
who's
going to check
playing
the
Chinese
guy who's,
checkers? Which one is playing Chinese checkers here?
that's what I don't know. I
Oh,
don't.
oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. This has been amazingly enlightening. I must tell you, I have more questions than I do answers at this particular point. I really would like you to come back again because I think that you could share with us more of the historic perspective of the participants of the war. You
I'd
know,
love to do that sometime. Yeah, absolutely.
Great. Hold on, please. I think Old Blue is back. He might have some final words to share as well. Old Blue, don't leave Abujet. He might ask you a question.
Yeah, that was trouble. I accidentally left and could not get back in. It was challenging. So now I've lost my avatar and the whole 9 yards. It's been terrible.
I
Uh,
see.
yeah, no, Abhijit. All I can say is your viewpoint is it's awesome to hear. You do a great job of conveying it, and it's great to hear that perspective as could only be given by somebody who's in the middle of it. So, I mean, it just incredible. Loved hearing you speak. It's been great to virtually meet you. So I really do appreciate your, everything that you've talked about. The way that you conveyed it has been flawless. It's just been really, really interesting to listen to. Um, I think there's been some really good questions tonight about uh, the influence of social and religious aspects and how that intertwines and how that ties into the narratives that Putin uses to motivate his own people. And while it confuses us in the West, particularly, I think that some of what Abji was brought to the party kind of explained or helped explain why those narratives were necessary and who they appeal to, and the historical background behind them. But also a really interesting outlook on China's viewpoint on it. Essentially, behaving like Loki, just sowing chaos, and how and particularly the aspect about the fact that human beings, because we are these slightly more evolved chimpanzees, one of the more challenging things to do, which is, by the way, the reason why we have the need for governance in the first place. Otherwise, we would kill each other on the regular. But it's difficult for us, our primate side, to really think through the second and third order effects of actions that we take. Did Putin want to wind up carrying China's water, basically being a strategic distraction for China? No, I don't think that's what he anticipated. I don't think he anticipated putting himself in a position where he became beholden to China. I don't think that he saw that essentially he's discrediting not only the liberal viewpoint on foreign policy, which is, like I've expressed, I think is a balance between realism and the liberal outlook of dependence on international relationships or international organizations and norms and what we like to call laws, where bearing in mind realism's understanding that you can call it a law all you want, but if you cannot enforce it, it is not a law. And who is the enforcer of international law? And what we've seen is, while people view America as some kind of hegemon, the fact is that there have always been limits to the power of the United States, just like there are limits to the power of any country. But for instance, why would we intervene based on humanitarian principles in one place and totally ignore another, and claim to be in any way justified in doing it in the first place? If you're not going to do it in all places, why are you doing it in one? Why do you pick and choose? How do you pick and choose? But at least having some kind of a nod to the international order, a nod to the United Nations to seek some kind of permission or at least acquiescence to any of those actions. What's really different about this situation, didn't even pretend to seek any kind of legitimacy. And so Ukraine is going to have those long-term impacts of changing the way that many people look at international relations, changing the way that people look at the issues of global supply chains and globalization. And I agree very much with 𝐁𝐿𝐫𝐷 that what we've witnessed is part of the beginning of the end of globalism as far as that goes. And quite honestly, what it is a demonstration that as a human race, we're not ready for that. We got over our skis, as they say, and unfortunately, we've created vulnerabilities, and we've all done it, the East and the West. We've created vulnerabilities for ourselves that are now, I don't think the word exploit is a good word for it. There are some exploitations being made on that, our trust, our belief in this emerging new world, which many people bought into and some people never bought into. But there's been this zeitgeist, if you will, that globalism is inevitable. And I think what's happening is that realistically, again, we're not ready for it. There are certain technologies that people really, really want, like the green technologies that were the renewables, that people really, really want, and they want them for honest reasons, for very honest reasons. But they're not there yet. The fact of the matter is we can say that we want to be independent of fossil fuels. And what we're finding is that it's not ready for prime time, not completely. Hopefully it gets developed in that direction, but it's vulnerable at this point. The fact is that Germany still depends on Russian natural gas to light the lights, to heat their homes. China just stuck a thumb in the eyes of environmentalists worldwide by upping their coal buy by 100 million tons a year from Russia to help take up some of the slack in their economy. Why? To empower their Loki to run around and make mischief and annoy Western Europe. What I think missed in this conversation, we just didn't have time for it, was something that I would love to have a conversation with Abhijit about, in that Eurocentric view, and how the Russian identity is also tied around this sense that Western Europe has never ever viewed Russia as an equal. They've always been, Russia has been the bumpkins. The way that Russians look at Ukrainians as being the bumpkins, okay? Europe has always viewed Russia as the bumpkins, and how that impacts the Russian psyche, the Russian soul, as you will, and drives resentment and a need to, just as an aside here, we just witnessed a repetition of history. Well, they say history doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes. In the 1800s, Tsar Peter the Great, who was very interested in naval architecture, he studied it in Holland, and he eventually built St. Petersburg into a significant port, but it had that problem of freezing over in the wintertime, and the Tsar knew that what really differentiated him from the great empires, because he wanted to be a great empire. Russia wanted to be a great empire. But he knew empires have navies, ocean navies, and they're able to exert their power well offshore because of that. And so he built a magnificent navy on the Black Sea, all new construction. The Turks said, "Hey, dude, that's a beautiful navy you got there." And the Tsar said, "Yeah, thanks. I really like it. Don't you? It's pretty, and they're all very modern." And the Turks said, "Yes, very beautiful. Would love to see you try to get it through the Straits of Bosporus. Love it. Pretty sure our artillery can make a mess out of it pretty quickly. That fleet is never leaving the Black Sea." That is also that dynamic. Russia started to look, as they're building this empire, and they'd already subsumed a significant part of Central Asia, looks to the south and sees what? They see a gorgeous deep water port in a country called Afghanistan. That port is now Pakistan.
But Old Blue,
this all ties together.
It all ties. Because the reason Old Blue, because I really love all of us to come back, and we know it's an ongoing story. It's so much to cover. The one thing I want to say, before I get the final word to Abhijit, is that I think we all can agree that this is a reality check on our geopolitical situation for all of us, right? That's the one thing. This is a reality check. Sometimes, sometimes we need it. It's a shock to the system. It's a reality check. I don't know if you're gonna say it's changing. I don't know if it changed anything or just made us realize things that were always there that we took for granted. To be things that we thought it to be more powerful than it wasn't, and we thought some things to be weaker than it wasn't. It's a time for negotiation on some level, even if it's just in our personal thought of our geopolitical situation, or is it in the structures and institutions that define our geopolitical order? So that's my takeaway from this first session. Russia, Ukraine, the reality check.
Well, thank you. And this has been magnificent. Abhijit, you really lit up when Blue asked you that question. And so I am dying to hear your answer to that question.
Could you just quickly summarize that question again? I've been caught up in...
Yes. What he asked you was about the way that Russia looks at Ukraine. That is the way that Europe looks at Russia, and the way, and he talked about how that's been building on their psyche and how that might be affecting the notion of war right now. And so when he asked you that, I mean, your face really lit up. I was like, oh, well, what is the answer to this question?
So I'm going to keep it very short. Why it lit up is in India, we've been watching the European and North American narrative on Ukraine with just astonishment at the blatant racism we've seen on BBC or MSNBC and things like that. These are blue-eyed, blonde-haired people. How dare you bomb them? As opposed to, all the brown people and the black people and the yellow people that you get to bomb,
Mhm.
So validation, the need for acceptance is such a powerful element of conflict and foreign policy. And Old Blue in that sense nailed it. Russia never, for a long time under the Rurikids, it never had this need for Western validation. But under the Romanovs, and ever since the Romanovs and this Europeanization of Peter the Great, they've always felt this need to be more European than the European. The fanaticism of the neo-convert, the fanaticism of the neo-European. And if you actually look at the genetics, Razib Khan on his Substack has done a fantastic study of the genetics of Ukraine versus Russia. Russia has incredible genetic diversity. A modern Russian living in Moscow with blonde hair and blue eyes has Mongol blood in him. He has Turkic blood in him. He has Inuit blood in him. He has all kinds of Eastern Oriental blood in him that a Western European who looks superficially the same does not. Ukraine, on the other hand, is extremely homogenized in a very strange way. So, on one hand, Europe's looking down on Russia had a lot to do with genetics and Orientalism on one hand. On the other, it's just when somebody as big as Russia descends on the scene whose culture is completely different from yours, whose thought process, everything is different from yours, there is the natural tendency to other. And I've always seen this in dealing with Russia. Why would Europe accept America, which eclipsed Europe and technically should have also been othered, was not othered, but Russia was? Russia always sees it from that perspective. And one of the lines we've always, I can tell you as an Indian, one of the lines, it's one of the fantastic insecurities of the Russians. We try to tickle and play upon. Every time we meet the Russians in track twos and things like that, we're like, you're not really Europeans. You're one of us. The Mongols invaded us. The Mongols invaded you. We're kind of like Mongol cousins. So let go of them. Let's screw China together. That's always been a sort of pitch to the Russians. It works great for us. So your misfortune is our opportunity.
Wow. Mr. Pelu, I would say this is the place to pick up next time. Would you agree, sir? I think he agrees. He's on mute, but I think he agrees, right?
No, this is the place to pick up. Yeah, I'm sorry, I was doing technical because I was trying to get Old Blue back in. He says he's backstage. I'm trying to tell, but yes, this is the perfect place to pick up. Thank you so much, Abhijit. Thank you, Coach Love. Thank you, Old Blue, if he's in the background. If you could hear, can't get him on, whatever. But thanks for being here. This was phenomenal. It was phenomenal. Please come back, Abhijit. We're gonna call you again. I will come back. I beg, come back. We're gonna have the number 2. We need you. Number 2 is gonna be. We're gonna pick up where we come up. I so appreciate you coming here. It's been a great delight. A great delight, sir.
This was great fun. Thank you, Mr. Pelu. Thank you, Coach Love. Thank you, Old Blue. I don't know where you are, but thank you so much. See you guys. I'd love to be back. Wow.
Wonderful. Don't leave just yet. I do want everyone to know that next Sunday, Julia is going to come and she's going to give us a personal look at her life and her family as she grew up in Ukraine. So that is going to be magnificent. Oh, Blue is actually not quite backstage. I did see him trying to get back in. But something was going wrong on his end. If he would like to come back before we fully wrap things up, that would be fantastic because I would love for him to say goodbye. We'll do a brief debriefing backstage. So don't completely log out when I turn the show over and end it on screen. I just want to say to everyone how humbled and thankful I am that I have the opportunity to spend this time with you and to learn with you and to explore with you. You have no idea how much your presence helps develop my soul. So I thank you. And I also want to thank Mr. Pelu for all the magnificent hard work that he did on this program and contacting everyone. Abujet, I'm chasing you down and I'm hunting you down to come back and be with us and hang out with us and just help us give us a world perspective. I mean, if there was a such thing as bringing the tea to a global perspective, sir, you gave us the tea on a global perspective. So, I mean, I have to say, I've just never had that experience before. So, the tea was hot, sir. The tea was hot. Annan has come up really quickly, and he has been Mr. Pelu's right-hand man. What do you have to share, Annan?
Nothing to share. I just intended to sit in the background, not to be on the stage.
Oh my goodness. Well, anyway, just thank you, everyone. I continue to remain incredibly grateful just for your presence. Oh, I see old Blue trying to use his technology to get in. I'm not sure if he's going to make it, but I will invite him back next time. Just thank you, everyone. Absolutely thankful. I'm just eternally grateful and humbled by what we get to experience together. Bye-bye for now.
I want to thank everyone. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everyone.